I gotta really.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you all here today. We're ready to get going. I apologize for the late start, but we do have a quorum. We'll make note that the mayor is in DC this evening, but will be joining us, or at least attempting to join us later in the regular meeting, but he will not be here for the work meeting.
He's in route. Sometime later tonight. He's going to try to get here, but he'll be on the phone.
Okay. All right, so let's go through our agenda here with the work meeting. Does anybody have any questions on the upcoming agenda? Any thoughts or concerns?
I would just say that given item 6.2 on our agenda tonight, I think it's fair to say we probably anticipate a fair amount of public interest in that item. Obviously we have our regular public comment at the start of the meeting, but I think there'll be potentially a lot of people here to comment specifically to that item. I would just say we move any public comment associated with item 6.2 to coincide with the start of that item. So
we'll hold any public comment for item 6.2 until that item is discussed.
So that would be my.
So I'll make that comment at the beginning of the meeting.
That would be my recommendation. Like I say, I think we run the risk of unnecessarily delaying the rest of the agenda with all that public comment potentially at the start. So I think it's just better to put it there with that item if the rest of the council concurs.
We're all comfortable with that? Well, and the nice thing is then we'll have all of the information that the public can hear and may help them with their concerns or issues that they might have on that particular item. Okay, any future agenda items? All right, so let's move on to our administrative reports. And first up is Brett on the discussion of the fiscal year budget. Or I'm sorry, the fiscal year unified budget.
So
police budget.
We had a finance committee, we were looking at the numbers, what's going to be our budget towards unified fire for this next year for services. It's created some more concern about what are we paying for, what are we receiving, and we've had conversations in the last 4 months about that, concerns about that, and are we really getting what we're paying for? And Alan, you want to take a minute about talking about where the numbers at?
Well, I think it comes down to that we had 18 and a half officers this last year, regular officers. We had 13 and a half actually here. So we were paying for 5 that we weren't getting.
We can go to that,
That's our big contention is we've got officers we're paying for, we're not getting. And it's a large amount of money.
So we look at the budget, and I know Councilman Henderson's been highly involved in on the finance committee's meetings as well. But our budget's been changing. We shifted from Slovisa first year to UPD, this contract model to the interlocal. We looked at that and our budget kept moving almost monthly because of discoveries of some pool services that probably should not have been in the pools. They actually eliminated one pool. Some of our costs went over DA agents and the motors, particularly because they had to go find a place to basically have a home to be paid for out of different funds or a combined fund. And then we allocated monies to add on our sergeant right at first of the year to help us with some issues we was having here on supervision. And that did get filled. But if we add on request for line officers as early as 2016, we added 3 in July. And there was a request because we in Slovisa that we had enough money to pay for 2 more first year. Those allocations have actually never been filled. And so the frustration becomes, are we paying really true to what we're receiving? Or are we paying more than we're receiving? And try to dial through the financial piece of it. And there's been a win to try to muddle through it. There's still not clarity about, where's the money going after it doesn't get used. When you talk about the cost of manning and backfilling shifts and all that, but it's not happening on a regular basis. There's reasons on both sides about saying why is that happening, why it's not happening. But in reality, where's the money that's left over and where's it going? That's the bottom line. And then come to find out discoveries. In 2016, we allocated those funds to be spent in the Slovisa model to add on more officers. When that gets approved through the budget at UPD and Slovisa, when it passes both boards, they should be following up and trying to hire those people and also buy the assets that go with it. We found out just recently, also, some of those assets have not been purchased, and they were just recently ordered in trucks. So if you don't have the truck here, why are you gonna hire someone that's not gonna be in it? So we did get some trucks delivered to us. 2 are used from the boneyard. I can tell that there's, and 2 are newer. Probably don't have any mileage on them. So we like having the presence, having the vehicles in our presence. So it shows that we have police force here at all times. But the concern is really the bottom line boils down to, from a taxpayer, and my responsibility as a city manager is, when we contract for something, are we receiving 100% of the service? And that's what you've all tasked me with that, and look at that. And Councilman Henderson, again, knows the detail very well. We've been sharing that with you over the months. And there's not a good accountability through payroll to marry up what we're paying, to marry up and say, yes, they work these shifts. I know for a fact, several shifts, I'm kind of crazy manager. I like to monitor the radio, find out who's on shift and who's not on. There's several shifts that was just covered by the sergeant on himself on the whole Twin Rivers and Herriman. So if something, we always have backup coming in. It's probably minutes outside our boundaries. But the real critical factor is 1 officer to cover 2 cities is not, and then Corporate County and Concord is not good enough. And so this causes us to go down a path of what's the best interest of our residents. And my job and task is for number 1 is take care of Herriman. That's what you task me with, give me a grant order to. And we believe we're in costing models right now. We believe we can staff up the level, and there's always that consternation of, can we really staff it up? Can we really get those allocations in the market? Because not everybody wants to be a policeman right now.
Allocations, just so the public knows, allocation as a police officer.
Yeah, allocations are full-time officers. So we feel strongly we're putting together a package that would be interesting to officers from other agencies. When we get down that path, we'll be able to offer up them in kind or a better proposal to them to maybe consider.
One other thing though is, in addition to the 5 that we didn't get this last year, the new budget proposes, and I'm not sure which it proposes, because the budget summary of the finance director shows that it proposes 1.5 more allocations for us. The costing exhibit shows that we're getting 2.5 more. But you pay for those whether or not you get the officers. So we're gonna go from 5 officers who we're paying for that we don't get to either 6.5 or 7.5, whichever number's right. Again, that we're not getting service for.
And so we're putting a model together that's feeling like we can, for the same amount of dollars, we can add on more officers and give our residents the public safety they're looking for. And we've heard concerns by residents, I never see an officer. Well, now we know why, because these allocations are not filled. UPD model, I've always been a believer of, and you know that about me. I've been a preacher of that since the infants of that, clear back when Sheriff Kennedy was in office. But the point being is, when we allocate and pay money for an officer, an allocation, we assume we're gonna get that officer. But because of an equation that's used on need for service and how much other precincts are down to serve officers as well, we may get some, we may not. They just turned 2 more officers out for an FTO, which is coming off of the training module, ready to go hit the street and use their own car and actually start doing law enforcement. We did not need either one of those.
What factors are used in that equation? Do you know, Brett?
I do not know. I know the call volume, what kind of type of calls, how much the other precincts are down as far as officers, and that's their concern. And when you start, I know those are 2 of the factors of that equation. Maybe there's a 3rd. I don't know what it is. But the point being is, if we hire somebody, we expect them to be here. And if we're paying for someone, we expect them to be here. And if they're having a struggle, I get their problem of hiring and recruiting someone to be an officer right now and get them through the program, get them out in the street. There's a big delay. But to our credit, we don't have high call volume. So we're always going to be the last ones that's going to get allocations. And if we add on these other 1.5 or 2.5, whichever budget we look at, which is the truth, we're going to be another 7 or 6.5 officers down that we know they can't fill. No one can give us a guarantee when we're going to get them.
with the concern that we don't have the officers on the street, but our taxpayer dollars are still paying for those.
every month.
And plus our taxpayers' dollars paid for the trucks and the equipment,
Yes,
even though there was nobody to fill the truck or equipment,
that's correct.
that money was still taken and.
That's for the guns, the bullets, the cars, the computers, the radios, everything it takes them to do their job.
Well, and it's also my understanding, because the equipment is, you know, a question that I've had as well, but it's also my understanding that there, correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, anyone that can, if there is, that when a new officer is allocated, then the full cost of all that new equipment is included in that first year cost.
All equipment is, particularly the vehicle, they actually give us a little bit of surcharge for the first year, pay for the replacement fund of the vehicle when it comes on a cycle.
Okay,
Does that
so,
make sense?
okay, so we're paying for according to that, we're paying for the full vehicle that first year, plus a little bit of a surcharge to start with the replacement plan.
Correct.
We're paying for the full cost of all of the other equipment, the MTD, the
Yes.
terminal for the vehicle, all of the equipment for the
Radios.
officer, all of those things. And then is it also correct that the next year that we pay for that officer, filled or not, we are now beginning to pay equipment costs for replacement of that same equipment that we just purchased new the year before?
That's correct.
So,
And we
So-
don't have the equipment.
so what I'm
It's not here, it's.
I guess one of the concerns that I have and that I'm hearing is that not only we're not getting the officer at the time that it's allocated and we're paying for it, we're paying for all the new equipment that we're not getting or seeing, at least in our possession. And then the next year that it goes unfilled, now we're starting to pay the replacement even though we never even got the new stuff in the first place. Is that an accurate
That's an accurate statement.
statement?
And we had talked about the first part of this last week in kind of our report to answer those questions, but this is kind of the new add-on is that yes, each year we continue to pay for that officer that's not filled, we start paying a replacement cost for all the equipment that we don't have either.
Equipment and vehicles are scheduled to be replaced how often?
It depends on,
They do a grade point on equipment and trucks, so they look at mileage, how much the truck's been down, how has it been damaged. It gives a point system, so you're typically for a patrol vehicle, you're looking 3 to 4 years.
3 to 4 years.
If you're looking at investigations, something like that from forensics or something like that, you could go 5, 7, 8, even 10 years, depending on what the point system does. And that point system's been adopted through their fleet management board, and they actually contract with Salt County for fleet management as well.
so
Yeah.
to give you an idea, I know it's been short notice, this was from the finance meeting, we got this the day before, I believe, but we'd been asking for this for a long time and just got it, but we had kind of discussed some numbers I drew on the board in the work meeting last week. But they gave us new officer this year versus existing, so to answer your question for vehicle replacement, gas and oil maintenance, precinct operating. And we've asked for a more detailed, list than this, but just the vehicle replacement, so existing officers, we pay for that person. We've already paid for the vehicle up front, so we don't have the person, we don't have the vehicle. Paying for the person again, and we're paying another $5,000 every year to replace a vehicle we don't have.
And where the council's given me direction, or his conversations in our work meetings for the last 4 months on this issue, we should be paying for something we're not receiving. And if we had our own police force, we would be able, if they're not here, we're not paying for them. And if you tell us to go work overtime hours to fill that, we actually have a number, we have a number we can get our hands on and wrap our head around.
So, and it should be mentioned that and Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, again, as we have all these conversations and we kind of get differing answers from conversation to conversation. But what we've been told and what was discussed yesterday is that what we've kind of been told along is that it evens out. Even though we don't have these people and we're paying this cost, it evens out because they fill those with constant manning. What was mentioned
Constant
yesterday.
manning,
It's
again, for
overtime.
explanation,
Sorry, it's
is
overtime.
somebody coming back to work in overtime.
Right.
To
So
fill
we,
that
so we don't
open
have an officer to fill that shift, so it's opened up to the pool of officers for overtime. They call it constant manning, and the sheriff stated yesterday in the finance meeting that they try to do that at 70%. On the exhibit that the finance director gave us, the average overtime rate is $45.50 an hour versus just this, and this is just salary and benefits. This does not include the equipment, et cetera. Versus if we had an actual person there, it'd be $47.18, the overtime equivalent was $45.50. We've always been told, well, it all equals out because you fill those spots with overtime shifts. What we're finding out is two things. One, they try to fill those at 70%. Rarely is it 100%. So even if it were 100%, we're still paying all the costs of those equipment, et cetera, that aren't there. Second, our precinct has been somewhere between 30 and 50%. So it's the same question come back to us, where we paid a bunch of money, where did it go? The overall answer that we have gotten is that it goes to the UPD fund balance.
Can we back up for, can we back up for just a minute? Before we start this discussion in our regular meeting, I think it's helpful for those that haven't been, aren't part of the city, don't understand the whole timeline we've been going through, and I'm gonna look to either you, Jared, or Brett. If you could just for a moment, go over the timeline of when we joined the UPD, when and why we left Slavisa, and then when we started to have concerns with Unified Police and what those concerns were, and when we started asking for financial information, because I think it's helpful to understand the timeline that we're dealing with, that this is not a decision that we looked at in the course of a week.
Right.
I want to clarify what timeline we're looking at, so whoever wants to take it, let's just back up
I'll start, you can
and give
correct me.
some overall, I think an overall view of this will be helpful before we get to the
Can I
nitty-gritty.
make one comment before we get into this? Because I think it needs to be said right up front that this does not reflect on the people who serve Herriman.
Correct.
Period. This is not about.
We're happy with our officers.
This is
and the
not
job
about
that they
those
do.
who are assigned to the Herriman precinct and the job that they are doing, because we have some fantastic people out here. And I don't want there to be any misconceptions at any point in this discussion that this is personnel related.
Right.
This is, for me, this is purely a financial administrative matter, and making sure that we are doing our job as council members to make sure that our citizens' tax dollars are spent the most responsibly, and when it comes to services, that we're getting the services that we're paying for. And like I say, I just wanted to get that out there because I don't want this to get spun in the wrong direction, that this has to do with the people. So I just wanted to get that on the record, because I love our UPD people.
Yeah,
I
totally
think they are
agree.
fantastic.
I think we all agree with that. However, I might just say that a lot of what we're, and for the work meeting at least, what we were prepared is kind of update council on these items that we have covered in the past. And the general meeting might be better for us to go through the history and everything, that people up to speed. That's where.
So, if you will, what I would like to do when we get to 6.2 is I would like to start it with a brief timeline, because again, we have been in dealing with this for a long time, and I think to dive into a deep discussion without laying some groundwork as to, so we're all on the same page, so to speak.
That's a bit.
So whomever
for the
wants to
general
deal with that,
meeting.
I'm going to ask someone to give a brief overview of the timeline. What brought us to consider this tonight?
As a
So-
board member, I'll be happy
Okay.
to lead out and be corrected by those who've been here longer than me.
I would just tag on to your financial concern there too, in addition to that, and along with that, it's even more than just a financial, and it's so much administration, because when I hear that as a policy, UPD is a constant manning at 70%, and Herriman is down to 30 to 50%, and constant manning means that a lot of it is overtime officers who are already an extremely high stress job, and now they're coming back in and having to do more and more overtime, and so much of our allocation is being filled with overtime. That's really concerning to me on a safety issue for our residents. That's a huge point to me, as far as it's about safety here, and if we're running at 30 to 50%, we're not getting the police coverage that we need, and it is no fault to the officers on duty that are working hard to be here. It's a shortage, which I sympathize with, but then it goes back to the point that it's like, yeah, there's a shortage, but we're again paying for things that we're simply not receiving, and we have to figure out a way to fix this problem for a safety aspect here too.
So as far as this item, Brett, does that cover the updates to our previous discussions? And then for general meeting, we'll go through the history and process, what brought us here.
What the Mayor Pro Tem's asked us to do in the next meeting, 6.2, is cover a little bit of the history.
The history.
The the discussion's clear back in from the beginning of 8 Hours Patrol when we started in 1999. We can go that far back, or we can jump
Very
up to where.
briefly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the other update I'll provide from the finance committee yesterday is, as directed by council, we did inform them of our meeting tonight and the direction that we're looking at, and that the urgency we feel is the financial deadline. It's been communicated for a long time, which is July 1st, the fiscal budget year, so we'll talk about that as well. From that meeting, some of the other members are voicing similar concerns that we have now, and we communicated that while those discussions are good now, it was also said that they feel that it's too late to make any changes to the budget for this year. They'd like to table them and work on it next year. We communicated that's really not where we're at. We feel we need to make some other decisions. But more or less it was kind of too little, too late. So we'll kind of go through all the detail in the public meeting.
Okay, any other updates to 3.1? All right, let's move on to 3.2, a discussion of the concept to prohibit subdivision amendments to preserve existing large lots. Michael.
I'll come down here a little closer to you. So this came up as part of the Planning Commission's discussion of a potential subdivision and rezone. You will actually be hearing the rezone later on in the business meeting tonight. But there was a concern expressed by the Planning Commission that maybe we should look at ways of preserving large lots within the city, and it was suggested that maybe we look at suspending subdivision amendment regulation. That caught staff off guard. Having worked for several communities, that would be a really unusual proposal. I attached to your staff report a copy of state regulations. So subdivision amendments is a process that's recognized and regulated by the state. And of course, the city also has its own subdivision amendment regulations. But the Planning Commission had suggested that we bring this up as a topic of conversation. I think I've mentioned in my staff report that we think if the goal of the Planning Commission, or the concern of the Planning Commission, is seeking opportunities to preserve large lots within the city, that may be a better conversation for our future general plan amendment that we will be working on. I think there's great potential for unintended consequences. We often do kind of macro level subdivisions, anticipating further subdivisions as additional development interests come into the city. So it would be a very unique and aggressive approach. I mentioned in my staff report, I think that we would get a reasonable amount of pushback. And I think that would cause great concern among not only residents, but developers as well who are working with the city. But as mentioned, that was a request from the Planning Commission that we bring it before you as a topic of consideration.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts, Council?
Well, I think I have a good understanding of obviously the concern, expressed by the members of the Planning Commission, and we've had that discussion really at many levels for a long time of as it relates to density and how we're developing and all of those things. I understand, I think, where they're coming from. However, I agree with Mike that I think that this is really an issue to be studied, and the perfect time is part of the general plan update to look at that, and as we look at really those designations in the areas as they extend out from the center of the city. But I would have concern with pursuing the avenue that they had proposed to suspend those options for our residents and for landowners that have land in the city. And I think that obviously we need to be very careful of having an application that comes through the process and meets all the requirements by current ordinance and by the general plan and all those things, and outside of other very large concerns that may exist other than just the preservation of these large lots of not at least having the Planning Commission, at least at that level, forward a positive recommendation for us to consider, where I think we have a little more latitude to explore a few more of those options. So I appreciate your approach to it and your recommendation from that level to say, let's step back, let's look at this as a broader issue, and how can we tie that in with the general plan amendment update.
When I'll say going back to prior to January, the previous council, we discussed this issue and kind of agreed in that general direction, so that might be what the planning commission is thinking is, but we haven't done anything official, we haven't codified it. Like you said, if an application's come in, it has come in and we said, well, we've thought about this, which I agree with the idea that if a subdivision had been created originally and the lots were half acre, or whatever they were, and that was the subdivision, and one person in there wants to subdivide their own, well, they're affecting the other people who bought in that subdivision, etc. I'm all for preserving the integrity of what it was originally for those people that it affects.
Yeah. We've had that issue down along 6400 West as well.
Exactly. So I'm in favor of looking at that, but if it's not codified, I don't see how we can prevent people from applying for these things until we go down that road.
Well, and I think what the commission is asking is this something that the council would like us to initiate and study? Just for reference, here is just a sliver of the city. What is highlighted in colors here on this map is what is part of a previous subdivision plat. So we're talking about essentially freezing these parcels in place. Here are some reasons for and reasons against, as you were talking about, Jared, about having predictability and preserving existing land use. But of course, there's these unintended consequences, I think, that come along with that. Like, for example, we often do projects like this where we know we're going to further subdivide a project, but this is like a placeholder. So if we were to restrict or remove subdivision amendments, we couldn't further subdivide, a project like this where we know we're going to facilitate future commercial growth.
I think you just walk into a ton of unintended consequences on this. I think, especially if it doesn't, there's so many things like we'll discuss one tonight that doesn't change even the integrity of the subdivision. It would have the same type of uses on it. The lot size would just be changed. And so to me, it's like, I don't think you change the whole intent of the land use, but if the same purposes are there to divide it. And I understand the intent to try and keep some large lots, I understand that part, but I just think this overall ordinance would be a little too broad.
To Jared's point, I think obviously you mentioned, some subdivision that comes in that's full of half acres and preserving the integrity of that, whereas a subdivision that comes in that's a single lot subdivision of 2 or 3 acres.
Right, to me that's totally.
I think we understand that the potential exists for that to come back for a future subdivision on there.
That's why you could just study it, because I'm sure there's wording that we can use.
That could help with that, for sure. Yeah.
Again, this was just something posited by the planning commission.
Thank
you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Do you need any more direction than that, Mike?
Don't go anywhere.
I'm right here.
So, item 3.3, discussion of potential general plan and zoning map amendment for commercial office development at approximately 5100 West, 1800 South, 180.
Yes, and this property has quite a bit of history predating my time with the city, so you all may know a lot more about this than I do. Apparently, this northern section of this property, we had at one time thought maybe that'd be a good location for a park and ride. At that time, the property was owned by UDOT. UDOT has since sold or traded the property with a private property owner. They have talked with the city in the past about what can we do. Now they understand, of course, that the city is not encouraging or supporting zoning changes for multifamily development. They're asking what would be, they're kind of taking your temperature as a legislative body. Would we have any interest in changing the zoning here for commercial? Obviously, the current zoning is A1. The general plan also would require a change from agriculture to commercial of some flavor. This property also, we've talked about having some trails that pass through this property. So there is some public interest still, and the current property owner says that they would work with us to accommodate that. They recognize that the center kind of line of this project has a lot of easements and would not be suitable for vertical development. So they're looking at, parks, trails, parking lots, something that would be very horizontal. We asked them for just a little bit better picture of where that development might sit on the property. So these purple kind of dumbbell ends of the area is where they're thinking possibly a office or commercial storage to the south, and then office buildings to the north. They're proposing on the storage facility to only have access right in, right out from Mountain View. It would not have a connection to the neighborhood. I understood that was a concern last time, that they were proposing a connection to the residential neighborhood. So they're saying that they could do a storage product and not have connection to the residential neighborhood. And then just as some typicals, these are some prototypes of what they would have in mind as far as the scale. Not even necessarily the look and feel, but this is a project that this group, DAI, has done elsewhere. But as far as the quality of the project that they think that would pencil out on this site. And then I don't know if this is the scale of development for the storage space that they had in mind, but this is the image that they had sent me. Again, trying to do something that might create actually a buffer between Mountain View and the residential neighborhood in introducing this type of a land use in that southern section. So again, we're just seeing if this is something that the council thinks is worth exploring. We would actually have the applicant file the amendments to amend the general plan and the zoning map. So they would be doing the work to persuade the city to change our plans.
So to be clear, is there any revenue generated from a storage facility such as this?
Well, obviously there are rental fees. I'm not sure that's considered to be a retail.
Yeah, I'm
service
referring
tax.
to anything of a sales tax nature that
Yeah,
would come back to the
and then
city.
of course there's the property value itself would be increased, and we'd get a very small sliver of that.
I'm just trying to differentiate the
2%.
difference
2% to be
between uses on a commercial piece of ground in terms of what comes back to the city.
Right,
That's what I'm wanting you to
right.
illustrate.
Yeah, so very little. Yeah, there's no retail.
Maybe that's what they
activity
would
here.
want them to try to illustrate to us, is the benefits.
Yeah.
I'll say previous discussions on this property, the residents in that area were extremely negative on storage facilities for a number of different reasons. I mean, there is one on the other side. Personally, the picture you have up here, I mean, it is a challenging piece of property. I'd be much more inclined to offices, depending on how the storage facility is laid out and the effect on the residents, et cetera. I mean, as I'm saying, I'm willing to look at it, but I wouldn't give any assurances that we're open.
Right, and there's certainly no commitment here. As I understood it, and Gordon, maybe tell me if I'm wrong, I understood the greater concern was that we were showing a connection into the neighborhood from this project, and I think now
We
they're
go back
saying
to that.
they can
So
put
you're
together
talking
a
about at
project
the end
and
of
not
that,
have access.
you're talking
to
about
the-
at the end of that cul-de-sac
Right.
there.
Right,
So it's coming up a private road, so that's a private access.
Yeah,
So
I would absolutely not be in favor.
right.
That's the issue that. the rest
And
of
this,
the product-
this little shadowed site plan is not accurate. They're saying they would have a right in, right out only from Mountain View. Yeah, so they think they can do this project without that neighborhood connection.
I mean, I'll concur with Jared that I guess I'm okay in looking at a little more conceptual design and how they intend to really make that access off of Mountain View to really buffer themselves a little bit from that residential area to at least look conceptually at it. But again, that's by no means saying, no, I'm in favor.
Right.
I'm in favor of at least exploring it a little further.
And that's really what you're looking at, is if you have enough
Yeah.
nods to have them move forward with the concept plan.
Right.
And is that,
Submitting
are we all
a-
good there?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
So
if
it's
they're,
how
if
you're
they're serious,
gonna use
yeah,
the
we wanna
property,
see
yeah.
more
So
details.
yes,
on it.
I think so, yes, absolutely, we're all in favor of moving all in favor of
They should
moving
remember
forward
that
with
the
the.
concerns of the neighborhood, et cetera, will all be vetted out again, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
our always willing to look at
To
options.
look at options.
One of the big concerns typically from a city is on storage is revenue and so forth. One of my opinions on storage is it should go in the places where really no other commercial can work, and you're dealing with a site that has a right-in, right-out only. And so to try to make office or retail or something off of a right-in, right-out, it's gonna be very difficult. However, the last time we submitted, we had looked to do the storage on the north site. I think I agree that it'd be better to do something different there, office, something that could provide an excess sales tax for revenue generating or something.
For services,
Or
again.
service-
And
something-
that is a big
something
difference,
else.
because when it was proposed last time, it was on the other piece.
The other end,
And that was really objectionable, looking at that, if they can get approval for right in, right out, there's no connection, and we can do a good enough buffer to the neighborhood.
Okay.
And we wouldn't be looking to do 3-story, that was one that just got built, so.
I would assume as part of the real estate transaction, you've already had a commitment from UDOT.
Yeah, there's
allow
already
you
approved right in,
right
right out.
Okay, and then you're up yet again, are you
Okay,
not?
sure.
Update on proposed Herriman Crossroads Development Agreement. Oh,
Please
go ahead.
make sure that there's absolutely no commitment of a zoning change here.
No.
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 Yeah, so let's just, for the record, yeah, no commitment of a zoning change, but certainly we're willing to listen
To consider
further,
it.
yes, on what your ideas are for this piece.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay,
All
go
right.
ahead.
So this next is just a quick update. Ken Olson and Gary McDougall attended a planning commission meeting about a month or so ago. And we, during our work meeting with the planning commission, went through their latest version of the development agreement. And really it was intended to be more like a handoff, like, okay, here is the latest draft of this project. We explained to the planning commission that there was no formal or legal requirement for the planning commission to make a recommendation to the city council, as you potentially could consider a development agreement with this party. However, a few months back, the council had expressed their interest in having the planning commission give their advice on the development, the design elements of the development agreement. And so that's what was really our mission. We were really saying, let's look at the design standards, the design proposal of this project, and give a recommendation to the city council. We followed up with the planning commission at our last meeting and said, okay, we want to schedule this, we want to roll up our sleeves, let's go through this in detail, come up with a list of what we like, what we don't like, what we think the project, we need more information on. And then we would give that information back to the developer, and then we would schedule it for some type of formal recommendation to the city council. Planning commission said, we do not want to dig in deeper on this because we feel like there's too many holes. They wanted more information before they were willing to have that level of review. So I reported that back to the applicant, and the applicant has said that they would like to move forward actually with a separate apartment development project that has been pending with the city, waiting the outcome of this development agreement. So just for reference again, this is the Herriman Crossroads piece off of Redwood Road. And they were proposing commercial and residential at lower densities than are currently allowed in the current zoning. And what they're proposing to do now is walk away from the development agreement and just start processing their conditional use application that they have on file for an apartment project. This is just the preliminary site plan, and just for reference, this was the proposed building elevations again. This has not gone to planning commission yet, but they have requested that we begin in earnest to review this and schedule this for a public hearing, or a public meeting with the planning commission. Now, having said all that, from a staff's perspective, we think we have maybe a couple of options that we'd like some direction on for the city council. In the past, the council has said that they really do want to enter into some form of development agreement. It seemed like we were saying we saw a mutual win-win here. However, we can't seem to come to an agreement on these design parameters. Right now, the developer is saying they don't want to spend any more money or time maturing that element of the development agreement. It's possible what we could do is remove those design stipulations out of the development agreement. And essentially what we would be agreeing to is the city would say we would not change the master plan of the zoning of the property. That's a key issue that the developer is trying to achieve. In return, we could agree to maybe a certain level of density, or maybe a percentage of land use mixture. There would be some real basic parameters that maybe we could negotiate. I've not heard from the applicant that they would be opposed to that. In fact, we had a brief email exchange saying that's a possibility where we could remove the design standards. And then, of course, each phase of the project would have to go through its own separate design review, essentially. Whatever is required by the subdivision code and the potentially site plan review or conditional use review. We would work on that every time a project was submitted to the planning commission. Typically, as we've done development agreements as a city, that development agreement acts like a preliminary approval. And then essentially, as projects come back to the planning commission, that's really a final review. And so we really have narrowed our opportunity to guide or influence that development project to a large degree, because we really have committed those things earlier on. So now we're saying maybe this development agreement would be a new form, and we would still have that preliminary and final design review through the planning commission or whatever process is required by city code. But it does give this development team some predictability as far as what they can do long-term with their property. So that's probably our best guess is what we think is reasonable based on the interest of both parties. We're certainly willing to take any other direction that the city council might have on this issue. At this point in time, it does not look like we're going to get a recommendation from the planning commission on the design guidelines. That's where we're at. We're at a stalemate on that issue.
And we do need it, we need some forward momentum on this one. I feel as if we have been caught in a whirlwind of sorts, you know, back and forth and back and forth. What are your thoughts, Councilman? I mean, how long have we been talking about this property?
3 years.
2 years.
I'm sorry?
3 years since our application,
3
and a
years.
year on the development agreement.
So, 3 years on the property, a year on the development, so what are your thoughts?
Let everybody ask.
Anyone?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding exactly where we're at. So the last kind of concept as far as the apartments and stuff that you brought in had a lot of architectural design and stuff like that. You're now saying we're moving back away from that, just going back to the original application.
No, we're not saying that. That came from planning commission. We're fine with that. The development agreement that we proposed, it reduces the density in phase one. It gets rid of all the 4 stories and takes it to 2-story townhomes. If you back up one to that slide that was just up there, this is part of the development agreement, which lays out the overall backbone main roads. It lays out what has to stay commercial. It says that some of the commercial has to be developed before we move to south. So that's in the development agreement. It's packed with a minimum amenities that we have to provide. It's packed with trails we have to provide. So that laid all that out. Then we brought in the architectural that you're talking about. It had the mountain resort theme. It had all 3 elements on every design, and they were all in the muted colors, the mountain theme colors, nothing white, nothing bright, no vinyl fencing, it was all metal or cement type materials. So we were okay with that, but it seems, I think they want us to get into more design and laying out buildings and everything, and we just think that that's premature, and we still have to meet city code, and we still have to come back and do those things. So, you know, we're fine doing the development agreement the way it is with even some minor tweaks, but it seems planning commission, and say if I'm saying they want a lot more, and we just think it's premature to do those things. We think we have a good template to protect the city for the type of things we brought you as far as architectural, and so we think it's a good development agreement for both sides.
By way of comparison, I do have a question. Are we requiring more of these developers from a development agreement standpoint than we require of others? Are we requiring less? I want to understand where the standard is you know, are other developers giving us more for their development agreement, which is why they have not encountered the resistance of planning commission? Help me understand how this fits in with our other developers.
Well, since I've been here just a few months, I can only compare it to the Danzy project and the Teton. And it did seem like those projects had simply matured a little bit more. I think there had been a little more investment. And of course, this group is no different. They're trying to persuade the city to enter into a development agreement. There's no legal requirement to do this. So they're essentially, you know, trying to sell their vision, that their vision is something that works for us as well as them. Yeah, I would say I think the other projects that we saw were a little more mature. That doesn't mean that we couldn't get this one to that level. And I apologize, certainly the current proposal, the current draft that they've submitted, you can certainly work on that as well. You don't have to remove the design elements if you don't want, if you feel comfortable with them. And maybe, you know, staff could look at that and see where we think we've still got some holes, because we probably do. You know, we probably do have a few things. We want to make sure that whatever we agree to, we can administrate. We can interpret and apply. I think sometimes some of the images are a little bit vague. When we're showing an image, what are we trying to imply as far as a regulatory element? How do we apply that to an actual development proposal? So I think we do need to sharpen it. I agree that I think that the proposal they've submitted is better for the city than going back to this project, this product type. I think the products they were showing, the images they provided in the development agreement were a much higher quality. I think we're better for the community.
Well, and that's, from my perspective, that's certainly where I'm at. I do not want to see the higher density option. So if I'm going to start where I'm at, I mean, I want to continue whatever discussion is necessary with some haste, given that this has been languishing for quite some time, but certainly would find it against all that we have agreed with philosophically in terms of density. So I am personally more for continuing discussion towards a development agreement that brings in line the density that we're more comfortable with, that has design standards that fit in with the community feel we're trying to establish. The sticking points are frustrating for all involved. I think they're on both sides, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and we can certainly do that with the council. We're just not going to have a planning commission recommendation like you had hoped for.
Okay.
So if the council still wants to do that, I'm hearing from Ken and Gary, you want to have that conversation with the council.
And just to
That's an
be
option.
clear, they have current zoning in place
Yes,
to really support
right.
this that we're seeing up in front of us.
And as you know, a conditional use by state law really cannot be denied unless we are unable to mitigate a negative impact.
Right.
And mitigate does not mean eliminate, but reduce.
Absolutely.
So we would likely find a way to get to yes on this project with the planning commission, because that's how the state code and city code is written.
Yeah, I agree. I think I had anticipated that it would continue down the development agreement path, and I would much rather see working with them through that development agreement and design guidelines and things like that, rather than going back to the square one with the apartments.
At this point in time, I've received an email from the applicant saying they want us to move forward with the apartment project and schedule that for a meeting with the planning commission as soon as possible. Unless they change direction.
But for some movement
Possibly.
from city council
Possibly.
that
Yeah.
perhaps
I'll say
expands the
my
discussion
understanding was that that's the direction we were going.
to work on a development
Work on
agreement.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
was
I guess, just for me, I guess I'm a little confused of how we got a little bogged down, I guess, at the planning commission level. Especially on a
It's good to
development.
hear you say that, because I was looking at you, the planning
On a
commission guy.
development, and it might correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we got a little bogged down on really the development agreement issue, which again, we want our planning commission to be involved in those processes, to have knowledge of what is contained in those development agreements, so when they get to that next phase of actually design and all of those things, that they can make sure all those are incorporated in there. But again, I'm right now, and I might be missing something. I'm a little confused of how
My understanding was that they wanted us to include
Of
in this
right,
sort of
how
process.
how that kind of got bogged down, or maybe misinterpreted a little bit at that level to ask for really more than their opinion of that development agreement that was proposed.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's the
Am
thing,
I
is
missing-
we were asking for their opinion, not a recommendation.
Yeah, and the development
And I
agreement.
understand they're wanting to say, we don't wanna give a recommendation, this is the council's prerogative, we're just looking for an
So
opinion.
I would be in favor really of really what Nicole says is again, I would like to have their involvement and their opinion, but if it's going to be incumbent on us to take at least that option and move it forward.
Yeah.
To try and get to that place to where we think we have a good agreement in place that's mutually beneficial. I'll tell you, based on what's up here and the last one you showed me, I certainly like the last one a lot better. And would much rather work in that direction, so I would be in favor to get that process moving at our level again, I guess, if the planning commission and, respect their opinion to not give one at this time, but I think that shouldn't preclude us from moving in that direction.
Yeah, and obviously with respect to the planning commission, in the development agreement, there's gonna be language that says it has to meet our current ordinances and things like that, which then goes back to the planning commission as it goes forward and allows them to do exactly that job, to make sure that as it comes in and it gets approved, that it meets the current ordinances, so that's a role. And yeah, I agree. I'm surprised that we were.
I guess based on, obviously, the request made to you with the current application, if I may, I'll look at the applicant and say, are you amenable to us taking the proposed development agreement and relooking at that, at least at our level, and seeing if we can move that forward and hold this off just a little bit longer?
Yeah, you guys meet every 2 weeks, I mean, I think if we can review it and get to, a month out to bring it to a final, I think we'd be happy to do that, but tell me if I'm speaking out of place, but.
Yeah,
Can we at
were
least-
encouraged
can
to
we
do
at
a
least-
development agreement last year, and it was gonna be passed. That was like in May, and we never even got to the council by the time the election happened, and so, we were gonna break ground by fall this year.
I
It was gonna
understand your
have to pass.
frustration, I
Yeah.
By
truly
the time
do.
we go now, we're not even gonna break ground this year.
So can we agree that we're moving in the right direction? We will move as quickly as we can, covering all of the bases we need to cover. Are you comfortable for us to give a recommendation to our staff to work on the development agreement and hold off your current application at this point?
I'm okay telling them we want them to bring it back next meeting.
Okay.
Are you good with that?
Yeah,
Yeah, if we can really make progress, but we see the language it
I
took
think-
us a month and a half to get the planning commission, I think, or a month at least, before we were even on the agenda.
Yeah, let me be clear, I agree that we need more information in the development agreement. That's why the planning commission was unwilling to do anything further, because they felt like we need more and better information in order to respond to it. That's not to say we can't get there. It's not, I don't know the interests of the applicant as far as the development costs and their plans. Clearly, they felt like they do not want to spend that kind of money and effort at this point in time. I think with the understanding that some of that detail would naturally come later in the development process. So we're just kind of in an impasse, but if the council wants to take up the work, staff will certainly work with you and support you and follow your direction.
And I'm seeing yeses all around, that
Yeah.
we do wanna move in that direction, so.
one thing with other development agreements, and I'm not so sure if this is accurate with the ones you just brought up, but they have a lot more single-family components, which it's easier to lay out roads, now. Ours, some of that is so far in the future to go have us spend laying out roads and street lights and, where we have this guide that just makes sure it's gonna be nice and meet the city codes, we just feel like that's a lot of work that is probably just gonna change anyway on some of it.
And almost half of it was looked at to be purchased by the city. So we go design all that and you end up with it anyway,
And I've seen a lot of other developments in other cities where I do see them lay out the single family, but then on a little higher density, they have a colored, bubble plan, so we think we're a little different animal than probably the other
You're
two.
right. And to be fair to your point, we've had several development agreements in the city that have a lot of land that is several years in the future to be developed, that we haven't been through all that, so
So I'm not quite sure what,
I guess
totally what they want.
I'm just in favor of let's see what we can do. Let's bring it back, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work and see what we can do on it.
All right, I think we're there.
Yep.
You've got what you need.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go to 3.5, Alan, on the budget.
Okay, again, this is the last meeting before the public hearing for the budget, and this is time for you to ask questions. Gordon did have a couple things he wanted to address real quickly, so.
If you have any questions, you can ask those first. I don't mind interrupting questions. Okay, I'll bring up my stuff.
But the real question is your stuff going to affect the budget?
These are
We're
two
gonna have lots of
budgetary
questions
items.
after Gordon's.
These are two budgetary items, and that's why we're bringing them up now on Alan's item. The first is the state legislators put together a way for us to get about an extra $300,000 a year for roads with this new tax. Right now, we don't show that money coming into our budget, so that's why it's a budgetary item. The county passed an ordinance saying that they get 67% of the communities that vote for it, then they'll approve it. Next week, we're meeting with the Wasatch Front and going over why there's no roads for transit projects in Herriman. And that,
When you say this, the staff is meeting with Wasatch Front.
right, not the council. The council can, but we had a council representative come a month ago and talk about this. So we're meeting with them to go through getting some projects on there. We want to come back and report to you. I also want to talk to you, so if that bill doesn't pass, we don't get the $300,000, Alan doesn't have to change the budget. If it does pass, we get the $300,000, Alan has to change the budget. I'm just giving you that part of it.
But in a good way.
In a good way.
300 more is a good change.
Yeah, and it will go for roads and those kind of infrastructure pieces. What I wanted to also just kind of make you think, or just give you some thoughts to think about as we go forward. Each year we go to the legislature and we ask for strictly just cash for specific roads, because we're in such a growth mode, we need them. The legislatures have felt that the cities have whined a lot, they give us road money, they're giving it to us. So we just, as we go forward, we're gonna wanna think about what this says to the legislature and the county. And so what I'm gonna recommend to you is, based upon the outcome of our meeting next week with the Wasatch Front, we'd like to report to you and then bring this back, a resolution of support for the county. You either get to say yes or no, I'm not asking for you to, but give you a chance to at least vote on it based upon our discussion with Wasatch Front.
Which to me is fundamental before I can make a decision on that resolution. It makes little sense to me to vote a yes to a resolution that effectively taxes our residents with no return on that investment back in our city, due to the fact that, as you mentioned, we don't have roads or transit that would qualify. So again, that makes me less inclined to vote for something that benefits other cities with our taxpayer dollars.
You had that discussion at the very first of this meeting.
Good use of taxpayer dollars, always a discussion.
So that's what we're planning to do, but we won't bring it back until you've had a report of what's going to happen and how that's going to affect our community. Number two, I wanted to bring one other item to your attention. Blake. Oh, he's at that he's in the transportation meeting downstairs for Mountain View Corridor. But he's gonna come to the rest of this meeting later on. And he is prepared a really great storm drain ordinance for you. However, the storm drain ordinance doesn't come without a cost. If you approve it, it's going to say we're doing things that basically we don't have funded the ability to do. And it's not budgeted in the budget either to do those things or to get the money. So once you get this ordinance, I want you to be aware of the implications, and we're gonna lay it out very carefully. This line in the ordinance will cost you X number of dollars, and this is what it means. This costs this much, this costs this much. And these are the criteria the EPA says we need to do to fall in compliance. There's really no comment we're looking for, because you've already told us to bring this back to you.
Okay.
But I just wanted you to be aware, it's a budgetary item. It's not in the budget, but we're going to, after you vote on this bill, we'll be changing the budget.
So there's a definite fiscal note attached to that ordinance.
That's all I wanted to say.
We did budget in the budget to do the study.
To do the study, sorry, yeah, I should have said that, not the ongoing, what the ordinance requires.
What's the length of the study? How long?
It's only good, we've had some discussion, it'll probably be within a 6-month period, 5 to 6 months. It turned out, it's gonna cut quite a little bit less than what we budgeted, so you'll get some after that, in the positive.
We need to take it before we spend that.
Well, we got ideas, but we'll talk.
So my follow-up question to that is the ordinance that outlines things that we are going to do, would they be things that we would implement prior to the conclusion of that study? Or are they going to be implemented along with the ordinance and in conjunction with the findings of that study? What's the timing on those?
So what we would do, we'd probably ask you to approve the ordinance and have it implemented some date in the future, and we'll give you a timeline when we think that should be. So and the legislature does that all the time. They approve an ordinance that doesn't take effect till day X, and that gives the city the time to put everything together. And what that's going to do for you is we will have this storm drain study. Will show fees, the menu, what it costs, and what you can collect, and what that impact is to residents. And so you will have the marry up of the two elements at the same time, and that's when you want to implement.
So the desire on the budgeting component of that is the desire then to change the current proposed or tentative budget to include that, or would it be a budget amendment at some point in the future during that budget to implement those fiscal notes attached?
So what we'll look at, we've talked a little bit about this, whether the storm drain would be like a utility fee, like a water standalone, maybe it's its own budget, or maybe it's implemented into the existing budget, and it is going to be a budget amendment. No matter what we're doing, we're going to be bringing a storm drain budget amendment to you for consideration. There's 2 pages actually in this budget that talks about this. There's just no funding associated with it. So it's not that the budget doesn't address it, it just doesn't assign funds to.
We don't know the amount yet, so
They're just
that'll have
pages,
to be a budget
just
amendment.
text to it. So I just wanted to make those 2 things clear to you. You can pass the existing budget knowing that these things are going to come to you in the future.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to say.
Just one more point, is that ordinance is mandatory. As a result of our audit, we have to adopt it. It's kind of an unfunded mandate,
For the storm.
and we're trying to fund it.
But
That's
we
what the
want
ordinance
to
says.
make it clear to the public, transparent. If you raise a fee,
So what
just
you're
say,
saying is when it comes to us, we don't have a choice of
we
whether
don't want
to
to
approve
carte
it or
blanche,
not.
this is the money
We have
that
a-
does it, we want to have a line item.
What's the timeframe on it? We have to adopt it by when?
Okay, Blake should be here. He has the details of that, and you're going to be getting that. He has a full presentation. That is going to be on the 6th of June when he's going to be presenting that. And he has a timeline laid out for you to do that we agreed to the EPA we would do.
Sooner, I mean, I agree, it's sooner than later. I think we should be.
We just didn't want to put a lot on this meeting, so we're putting a lot on the next one. I don't know why we're doing it.
One more point, I've already given him my draft, so he's tinkering with it, so
Good.
I talked to John Day. The draft will be ready for you to review in the work meeting next week. We're not asking you to adopt it next meeting, but we're going to ask you to review it, and we're going to go through it fairly detailed. And so John's done it. I think you, like you said, you gave it back to Blake, and he's doing the last bit of polishing.
Okay. Any other questions on the budget for Alan?
I have not received any questions from constituents yet either, from the public, so hopefully they'll, I guess, just encourage the public, look at this budget and send us questions.
And he's free to answer questions at midnight, 2 in the morning, so don't hesitate to give out that information anytime.
If nothing else, then we go to city manager updates, Brett.
We've got quite a few of those. Most of it's gonna be people at the table, but they come to me after everyone set the agenda out last week. So we probably don't have an update on Mountain View Corridor yet, so Blake's not back in the meeting.
We just want to let you know that meeting was being taken
We'll
place.
hold off on that. Well, if he comes in, we'll update you what he's forward in 2 weeks.
And they're discussing.
What Tammy,
connectivity.
she's not here, we're going
The
to the next
safety
one.
on that intersection. That's what
Let's see.
Okay, I want to make you aware of Alan, talking about health, HCC, impact fee study that's being done.
Well, we've talked to Zions Bank about looking at an impact fee study for public safety. This would primarily be for a public safety building sometime in the future. They're looking at our caseload and our need, and they're actually looking at what that'll take. We've talked to them a couple weeks ago, and they're doing some preliminary work on it right now. And we just want to make you aware that at some point that will come to you for what you want to do with it.
And we feel good about this because philosophically, the existing residents have paid for where the police are now, and the existing residents, or the future residents, will now pay for a portion of that through the impact fees of their building.
Well, and just a point of that is part of the plan, the long-term plan for this building was for the police to eventually have their space, so that their own space, so that would be expansion area for the regular city staff.
And Alan, you want to update us on the, your selection for our next auditor for this next year?
We've done a review of the audit proposals that came to us for this year. We are not required to replace them or change them every 3 years, but that's a policy that I've put in place, is that we want to see new auditors looking at our stuff every few years. So we put out an RFP, and we've gone through the selection process and chosen Keddington and Christensen. Good references, a good firm, and so we're going to notify everyone tomorrow.
Me and Alan talked about this actually 3 years ago, about putting this kind of standard operating procedure in place, make sure that we don't have the same audits. I think some cities get bogged down having the same auditor. In fact, we used to do that ourselves. I think it's healthy to change, so that, yeah, new fresh eyes looking over our financials, and hopefully our policies and our how we have separations from how a check is processed, payroll to policies, who makes decisions on what, who signs off on what. So it's a very healthy thing in our opinion, and I'm glad that he went through the process. And this is a big firm, it's a good firm. Feel confident in their ability to produce us a good audit this next year. Also with that, Gordon wants to talk about ICSC. That's taking off this weekend.
So we just real quick, because we won't see you till you're there. That's one Smith.
Do I have to have this when I go there?
Yes. There you go. If you want me to hang on to it, I will hang on to it if you'd like. Hold it. Hang on to it. Okay. You want me to hang on to it?
Sure.
Clint?
Just hand that way.
Can you be
He's the one that can be
responsible or not?
responsible, yes.
I'll call you wife.
I will change hands like 4 different times between now and
My
then.
bad. I didn't mean to start off with that, but we've when we get there, so I will not, because of some issues with me, I'm not going to be there Sunday night. You have a dinner with EDC Utah. A big deal for us is next year is the convention for the site selectors that do all the site selecting for major businesses here in Utah. And so they're going to be talking about how the conversation that I'd like to have is how do we get access to them, get them familiar with our city and the community and the commercial area. So that's kind of the first day. The second day we'll also have a meeting with them in the morning to kind of be a little more formal about the details of that. And then we'll line up and get everybody in different play formation and get it done. Okay, that's all I want to say.
What's just so I know, what's the preferred attire of the council as we attend?
I'm going to be wearing this. And
That same shirt?
Day after day?
Business casual.
He'll still have it on
tie.
now.
You could, a lot of guys may not, but a lot of people are wearing suits and stuff. I'm telling you, Vegas is not the place for suits. For the women, pants,
walking
suit,
around.
nice.
But you're gonna be
You know,
shirt and tie.
if you want to wear dress, you
No
can,
tie.
but just nice pants
This,
thing.
but no tie.
And very, very comfortable shoes. That's all I would say. And some people are not going to listen to me, others will. I'm not accusing
I'm
you.
gonna call anybody out, no public
For the
shaming.
sake
Excuse me.
business dress.
Don't like public shaming.
So before I give Gordon another thing to talk about, I want to give some good news. We actually closed and recorded the Butterfield property with A-Cup money. another 260 acres approximately.
Which brings us to how much money that we've received.
This year was 5.5.
I think it's
Total.
12.9 altogether.
12.9 and 5.5 this year.
5.5 this year and 12.4. And then we had 2 million of REPI, I think, or does that include the REPI?
That includes the REPI.
The 12.9 includes the REPI. Okay.
I don't have them separate.
And what are we anticipating in?
So we're gonna talk about that briefly now with the Washington DC. So
Thank you.
we went back there, and when we initially met with the National Guard Bureau folks, they were suggesting that Camp Williams, that's the whole body, was gonna get roughly about $2 million. By the time we ended the meeting, it looks closer to $10 million. It looks like $3 million will go to the Utah County side, and $7 million will be coming to the Salt Lake County side, which is us. We run that. Another important thing for you to know, there was an interpretation of some federal law that changed. A lawyer got promoted up through the Army, and they basically determined that military bases that have, he determined that military bases that have state land in them are ineligible for these kinds of funds, which would cut us off of some funding. We met with a couple of the delegation and so forth. We have a strategy that should be able to overturn that, because if that sticks, we lose all our money, and then it basically makes all the money we got illegal. And so none of that's a good deal. And so we have a very good strategy. We're constantly on the phone now with a number of different people. It looks like this will be overturned with the latest defense bill. So we're getting legislation. It's going to the House this next week. So anyway, we'll keep you posted, but right now everything looks very positive. We'll be able to keep all.
We're working with the verbiage that will help define what an installation is.
And takes out the fact that it's under federal property or state property. That's the push.
So just to be clear, when you went back there, we were about a $2 million, and with your trip back there increases, we're gonna get probably an extra $5 million based on your interaction back there. So a very successful trip to good return for sure on that investment.
Well, and to add to the return on investment, not only did we see success in that area, but we also, and maybe you wanna touch on this, the fact that we made some movement forward on cleanup within Herriman City from our neighbors, environmental cleanup that we've been trying to figure out for 20 years. So do you wanna speak to that briefly?
Yeah, real quick, John today wrote some language that's going into the EPA appropriations bill. What basically has happened is the federal funding to clean up that is not part of Superfunds or consent decrees is Brownsville money. And what the federal law says that if you're in a consent decree area or in a Superfund area, you're not eligible to apply, even if the material that's contaminated is not going to be cleaned up by either one of those funds. And so we, as Herriman, even though the Superfund and consent decree cleaned up property in South Jordan and West Jordan and the Plume and the county, it missed a section of missed Herriman. And so
Gordon, it didn't miss it intentionally, cut it out.
Say that again.
it cut it out.
It intentionally did not clean up the residential areas.
Well, the 20 years ago, and so it's hard to,
It's farmland then, so.
it's hard to understand why they wouldn't have done it, because they should have. However, what is too late to go backwards, so what we're saying is, let's change the current law that says even if you're in a Superfund site or you're in a consent decree, and the material is not ever going to be cleaned by the funding of those two things, then you can apply now for Brownsville. It also has a 15-year window that even if you're in a Superfund site and 15 years has passed and you're not cleaned up, then you automatically get to apply for Brownsville. So
That's the language we're trying to get put
That's the
into
language
the EPA appropriations.
So that's,
Brownsville just made an amendment and it got approved in March, so we couldn't hit the Brownfields note, but we are trying to get into the EPA appropriations bill with this verbiage to see if that will.
and we have our legislators right now putting these things in, and so this is really beneficial to us. They're doing a good job getting these things, and their staff has been very responsive. It's important to get everybody unanimous.
I want to go back that you know, there was been some question about the Washington DC trip. This is their component, not only one meeting with EPA, they went and got other people that we need to talk to, go back to the White House again, talk to them again. And the point being is, yes, we can talk to some of our legislators here, but the problem is, they're back there, and you can go from one office to the next and get them together to help us change these laws and bills for us. That's where the effect happens. Yes, we'd love just to go down the street and knock on their door, but that's not where they're at.
And then the last one was transportation. So, oh, no, housing, and we'll talk about that later. Okay. So there was a lot of good things, and we did talk about some more.
Nice.
Good. Have any more updates?
Yes, we do, somewhere.
There's one that.
Salt Lake County,
On the screen?
Oh, yeah, this is one more
If you
update.
want.
We were just gonna update this the county council planning commission.
Oh, yes.
How did that go today?
Well, he went to it, he was just gonna update you.
Let me do that, Brett?
yep, go ahead.
Okay. So, there were 4 commissioners present today at the Salt Lake County Planning Commission meeting. And they had, what's
How
that?
many commissioners are there?
I don't know,
9.
but there were only 4.
There's 9.
4 there today.
How's that?
Is that a quorum?
I'm guessing that constituted
You're
a
saying
quorum.
the county council,
Yeah.
County
the
council.
council
County
members, council
commission.
members.
It was the planning.
County
Oh, the
commission.
planning commission.
The county planning commission. I'm not sure how many there are, but it seemed like there was more. I don't know the exact number. They can have a quorum with 4, so it's probably 7, but it just seemed like there were more.
So,
This is the county planning
yeah.
commission, not the county council.
Yes.
right.
That's what I was thinking.
So the Olympia Development Project by Doug Young, which is in the county, bordering the city, was up for a general plan amendment and a zoning map amendment. And both requests were recommended for approval by the commission.
Did we speak to that at all?
No, we were just there to listen and see what the action of the commission was at this step in the meeting. We have certainly met with them,
So we have
and they have
communicated.
asked us.
We've talked to them, but we're not
for-
gonna speak in the meeting. We wanna keep a little bit low key, right?
Yeah. So the plan is fairly consistent with what we saw last time. It's 937 acres. More than half, about 60% of it is in residential. It has a total of 8,765 dwelling units that's being proposed. Now, that does not guarantee that they can actually build that many. That's the maximum that this plan would allow. They still have to figure out how to provide water and sewer and all the other services that are necessary. So that's the cap.
Traffic
And then
studies.
yeah. And they did have a preliminary traffic study at this level of planning that the commission had reviewed and the Salt Lake County Council will as well. But, so yeah, they're moving forward with the county. So we don't have a date yet when the county council will hear it, but we'll be present for that as well and give you an update on that action.
So we don't know what that's gonna go.
Yeah, no date on that yet.
Will you make sure that we're notified of when that's gonna be on?
Yes, yeah, we can certainly do that.
We emailed you the last time, the
Yeah.
packet, we'll email you the packet each time it's on. The strategy. We'll talk about the strategy.
Okay, next update?
That's it.
Does council have anything else?
We'll gladly take the few minutes before we start.
All right, I will accept the motion then.
Motion to adjourn the city council work meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good job there.